Hey everybody, Brandon here coming to you again. This is part 2 of a quick series on painting with speed versus going with some detail. So the first one we did showed you some of this leaf detail here on these trees, how I get these leaves in here, whether I'm working quickly or going with a little higher level of detail. Also those rocks, so if you missed that one, take a look at that. That's part 1 of the series. It's up on the channel. Now we're going to have a look at putting some tree trunks and some limbs in here, and then maybe a little bit of water down here on these rocks. So let's have a look at that now. Alright, so we have our trees here that we started in our last series, and on this left side over here we're painting here with speed and not nearly as much detail. So we've got this basic shape here in place where we've put in our leaf shading, highlights and everything. So if I'm going to drop a trunk in there, and I'm back to using this is just a half inch or half inch angled brush here, I would come in here and literally just grab some form of brown, black, however you're making a trunk in here, drop in a basic dark tree trunk and have it disappearing up in here in the tree somewhere. Maybe you'd put the indication wherever you wanted to up in here in the tree itself of where that thing wanders off, create some branches or whatever. Now we're doing a speed deal here. All I'm going to do is grab a little bit of a highlight color to drop down one of the sides, so whichever side of this painting I felt like my light source was coming from. So what I've had on the palette from the previous one, just a little yellow ochre, maybe a touch of white right on top of that brush, and then maybe we're saying the light here is coming from the right side. So I would literally just come down in here, touch that right side, and then bring it in a little bit as it fades across. Done. Very quick, very simple. Maybe if you wanted to come in here and do the same thing on a couple of those places that you brought in, entirely up to you, right? That's all I'm going to do. If I'm painting with speed, you have essentially what is the illusion of there's a tree there, and you're good to go. Now on this one, if we're trying to get a little bit more detail involved, let's just go back to our dark color here, and we're going to drop that. Drop that same tree trunk in. And maybe we see bits and pieces again all up into here, and you come back and add more leaves on top of wherever you want them. Now if I say my light source is coming from this right side, that's where I'm going to start my highlights. But in this case, painting with more detail, I'm going to create multiple passes of putting in highlights. And now I also need to make some decisions on what that tree is in terms of what its trunk will look like. So if we're going to call this some kind of oak tree, let's say, because we've done some leaf structure up in here, I'm going to take the tip of my angled brush and I'm going to create my first highlight pass where I just lighten things up just a little bit. And I literally touch in, using the tip of this brush, individual little bark textures all up and down this trunk. And again, this is just a first highlight pass. So I don't go to my full brightest highlights at this point. All I'm doing is tapping in with the top corner. So now hopefully you can start to see I'm creating more detail on this trunk on this side. There's actual individual pieces of bark starting to show up. And then if my light source is coming from the right, I will ultimately put the brightest touches of highlight on that far right side. And then basically as that brush starts to lose a little bit of its paint, you can move into the left Same thing with these limbs that are up in the tree itself. If you want to show that somewhere in there there's some light catching that further up into the tree, you can hit that if you want. And let's just say you've put multiple limb structures down through in here while you're doing this. Whatever. And then you want to finish off the product, you go back with your leaves that you were dropping in there. And just touch back in wherever you need to. Darkest stuff first, and then your highlights. To finish it off. Smaller brush. Takes a little longer, multiple highlight passes, but when it comes to creating detail versus painting with speed, that is the name of the game. Usually the smaller brushes are going to give you a lot more control, allow you to add a lot more individual aspects of each tree limb, leaves, bark texture, whatever it is you've got going on. But there is in the difference of very fast, laying in just the bare minimum, going a little more detail, and then this process right here, if you know, that's one that you can spend, you know, hours on, adding more and more layers of detail, highlights, individual tree limbs, individual leaves. It's entirely up to you as the artist in terms of how far you go into that. Now if we want to talk about water, so we got some rocks down here at the base of these trees. Water for the most part in a landscape, relative to everything else, lays flat. So your brush strokes when you're trying to put water in normally need to be horizontal brush strokes. If you're adding motion to your water, it's a, you know, some current, river, whatever you're doing, you can put that in your highlight passes after the fact. So water here, if we've got a rock base here and maybe it's part of some kind of river, the water itself is going to be relatively dark when you're looking at it. So I may just use that same brown that I've been in here with and come in here and make horizontal brush strokes to lay in the base of my water. Let's say it's coming in here between all these rocks, right? So there's my water. Or at least the start of my water, anyway. And I'm just scrubbing that brown in with my brush here, making my horizontal brush strokes, trying to smooth out any harsh lines in there. And ultimately on the side over here where we're doing more detail, I'm going to start the same way. So horizontal brush strokes, scrubbing in with the brush. Trying to cut out any harsh lines in there. Now, on this side, if we're painting quickly, we might thin out a little bit of paint with a touch of water here and just go into something like titanium white right on top of this brush we've been painting with. And we just move up here to the canvas and see what kind of reaction that gives us. So I have just thinned down some white right on top of this brush. And really just kind of streak it across there. And that's really about all I'm doing. That's about as much as I would do to throw some kind of water in there, whether that's, you know, could be a river. You could create some more motion than if you needed to keep it flat. So over here, let's say we're working the same idea. Again, I'm going to start the same way. It just ends up being multiple passes. So if I just thin down some white and peel it across here, making a thin, almost a transparent looking layer. And you can determine where some reflections might pop up. Whatever you want to do here. The point is we're going to spend more time on this side with multiple passes because we're trying to create a little bit more detail. So we're going to start essentially the same way. But now that I've got that in place, let's say that we're trying to show a little bit more motion in here. We'll go back with some more white and we'll start creating some individual touches of sparkle in that water, right? Just kind of tapping that brush along through in there. Maybe there's a little current in this water flowing through here. So we want to show that by creating a little bit more motion, not having just straight horizontal highlights. And wherever we think some sunlight might be catching. And if the water's flowing this way, I mean, you can add, you know, many little drop-off waterfalls in there. So let's create a ledge right in here. Let's say you can show that motion by bringing your brush down and then brightening up some highlight along the top of that, and then also pulling down a few highlights of water that's dropping. Maybe you paint yourself a rock in there behind that or with that. A ledge right in there, let's say, that created that drop off, maybe. I don't know. So again, more time spent, multiple highlight passes on this side to create more detail in our water, make it a little bit more involved, give it more character. Some final touches of bright white, straight titanium white with a couple of just dots of where it's really sparkling out there. And then you've got some moving water coming in front of these rocks. So here again, I hope you guys can see about, we've created two different scenes here that are very, very similar. To the left, we have gone very quickly, but we've still accomplished what looks like a tree sitting in some rock with a little bit of water around it. To the right, same scene, we have just spent more time, multiple highlight passes, and you can see our level of detail here is getting greater. So hopefully that will give you some ideas again of some techniques you can use to either create some fast work. If you're trying to paint something quickly, you want to turn out maybe multiple paintings, or you just want to get something done that creates still a fine finished product. Or if you want to spend some more time really detailing something out, you can keep this process going and adding multiple highlight layer passes until you're content. Till next time, happy painting, everybody.